The slave who sued for freedom and won. A man in chains walks into a courtroom. A woman, born enslaved, stands before a judge. Their masters believe they own them. The law of the land says they are property. But these men and women dare to say otherwise. They sue. They sue their owners. They sue the very system that shackled them. And in a time when freedom was considered a privilege for the few, some of them actually won. This is not just a story of one person. This is the story of the enslaved who dared to fight slavery in its own house, the courtroom, and claimed victory. This is the story of the slave who sued for freedom and won. Like, share, and subscribe, because today we are stepping into one of the most powerful and untold chapters in the Black legacy, the world of slavery and law. To understand the weight of these freedom suits, we have to step back, step into America during the 18th and 19th centuries. Slavery wasn't just an economic system. It wasn't just a labor force. It was a legal machine. The laws of the colonies and later the United States spelled it out. Black people were not considered citizens. They were chattel property, human beings reduced to commodities. You could be bought, sold, traded, mortgaged, willed in a master's will, like a horse or a piece of land. And yet, within this brutal reality, the law left cracks, small openings, exceptions that enslaved people learned to use. For example, in some states, if you were taken into free territory, places where slavery was illegal, you might have a claim to freedom. In some courts, promises of freedom written in wills could be enforced. In rare cases, even physical abuse could be grounds for release. The enslaved people noticed. They listened. They whispered. And they dared to test the very system designed to keep them down. The idea of freedom suits, a freedom suit, was exactly what it sounds like. An enslaved person suing their owner for liberty. Think about the courage it took. You're enslaved. You can be whipped, sold, killed with little consequence. And yet you stand before white judges and lawyers and say, "I am not your property. I demand freedom." This wasn't just bravery. It was rebellion. It was resistance in its purest legal form. The first recorded cases go back to the colonial period. By the early 1800s, these suits became more common, especially in border states like Missouri, where slavery and freedom collided. And among the most famous was a man named Dred Scott. Dred Scott's battle most. People know the name, Dred Scott, but they don't always know the details. Dred Scott was born enslaved in Virginia around 1799. He was later sold and taken to Missouri, a slave state. But here's the twist: his master, an army surgeon, traveled with Scott into free territory, Illinois and later Wisconsin, where slavery was banned under the Missouri Compromise. In other words, Dred Scott had lived on free soil. And according to legal precedent, that meant he should be free. In 1846, Dred Scott and his wife Harriet filed a lawsuit in Missouri. The argument was simple. Once free, always free. It was not the first freedom suit. Others had tried this strategy before and won. But Scott's case dragged on for over a decade. It went through state courts, then federal courts, until it reached the U.S. Supreme Court. And then the decision came down. In 1857, the court ruled not only against Scott, but against every black person in America. Chief Justice Roger Taney declared that black people, enslaved or free, had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. The court said Scott wasn't even a citizen, so he had no right to sue in the first place. It was one of the darkest rulings in American history. But here's the thing. Before Dred Scott, enslaved men and women had won freedom suits, and their victories mattered just as much. The ones who won, let's go back. Because history doesn't start and end with Dred Scott. Elizabeth Key, 1656, one of the earliest known cases was that of Elizabeth Key in colonial Virginia. Her father was white, her mother enslaved. By English law, she argued, she was entitled to freedom. In 1656, the court agreed. Elizabeth Key won her freedom. This was huge, because soon after, Virginia changed its laws. They declared that children would follow the condition of the mother, not the father. In other words, slavery would now be passed down through black women. Her victory forced the system to adapt, in ways that made slavery even harsher. Rachel Veers Walker, 1836. Another remarkable case came from Missouri. An enslaved woman named Rachel sued for freedom because her master, An Army officer had taken her into free territory. The Missouri Supreme Court ruled in her favor. Rachel won. This ruling, once free, always free, became a powerful precedent. It gave hope to others, including Dred Scott, who used the exact same argument a decade later. Winnie vs. Whitesides, 1824. A woman named Winnie, enslaved by a Missouri family, had lived for years in Illinois, free soil. She sued for her freedom and won. The court said, "If your master takes you into free territory, you are free." This decision was a direct challenge to slavery, and it set the stage for many others. Lucy Ann Delaney. Then there was Lucy Ann Delaney, an enslaved woman in Missouri who sued for her freedom in the 1840s. She fought in court for 17 months, and she won. Later, Lucy Ann wrote a memoir, one of the few first-hand accounts of a freedom suit by the person who lived it. Her story reminds us, these weren't just legal battles. These were lives on the line. Why these cases mattered, freedom suits were not isolated. They were part of a broader resistance. Each case chipped away at the system. Each victory gave others hope, and each defeat revealed the cruelty of a country that preached liberty while practicing slavery. Dred Scott's loss is often remembered as a step toward the Civil War. The decision outraged abolitionists. It convinced many Americans that slavery and freedom could not coexist. But the wins, Elizabeth Key, Rachel, Winnie, Lucy Ann Delaney, show us something else. They show us that enslaved people were not passive victims. They were fighters. They were strategists. They understood the law, sometimes better than their masters, and they used it when they could, to carve out spaces of liberty. The legacy. When the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, the legal landscape changed forever, but the echoes of those early lawsuits still ring. Think about it. Black men and women, considered property, walked into courtrooms and demanded freedom. They forced judges, lawyers, and juries to confront the hypocrisy of slavery. They forced America to look in the mirror. Today, their courage is part of the foundation of civil rights law. Every time someone challenges injustice in court, from segregation to police brutality, they walk in the footsteps of Elizabeth Key, of Rachel, of Lucy Ann Delaney, of Dred and Harriet Scott. The untold truth history books often skip over these victories. They highlight Dred Scott's defeat, but they don't talk about the many who won. But here's the truth. Slavery was never total. Enslaved people resisted at every level. Some ran away, some revolted, some fought in the fields, and some fought in the courts. Every case mattered. Every victory cracked the chains just a little more. And in those cracks, the light of freedom shone through. So the next time you hear the name Dred Scott, remember, he was not alone. He was part of a long, quiet, powerful tradition of enslaved people who challenged slavery in its own courts. And sometimes, they won. This is their legacy, the legacy of those who refused to be silenced. The legacy of those who sued for freedom and won. Like, share, and subscribe, because the stories they tried to erase are the ones we need to remember the most.